In our ongoing study through the Gospel of Matthew, we find ourselves at chapter 8, and we will be reading from verses 14 and 15. I will be reading from the Good Speed translation. Then Jesus went into Peter's house, and there he found Peter's mother-in-law sick in bed with fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she got up and waited on him. In the evening they brought to him many who were possessed by demons, and he drove the spirits out with a word and cured those who were sick. There are moments in the New Testament when we realize how little we know of the early church and its leaders. Here we see Peter the apostle was married. We know that Peter was Jewish, and in that tradition, family was extremely important. It is therefore very likely that Peter had children, a family in the full sense. If Peter's wife was living during his years of ministry, then it is likely that Peter's voice at times reflected issues he had discussed with his wife. The fact that Peter was married raises the question of how he supported his wife and his family. The reality is that we actually know very little about the people who became Jesus' apostles. In fact, you do wonder at this point in church history how much we are seeing them through the lens of tradition. In other words, that which is built up after the New Testament era, and not so much seeing them for the people they actually were. In this account, we are told that the mother-in-law of Peter was sick. Jesus reached out, touched her, and she was made well. She is then able to get up and begin to take care of her company. What emerges of her is a woman of faith. If this is the case, then it's quite likely that Peter's wife was a woman of faith, who was shaped by her mother, a woman of faith. I think we need to be reminded that Jesus was not always just calling out the reprobates to a faith experience. At times, Jesus was reaching out to those within the church. Jesus' ministry was aided and abetted by women like this, who provided practical service for Jesus and the apostles. In ways that we cannot always understand, the work of Jesus and his apostles were enabled by people who were anonymous to us. It is easy for us to look at the ministry of Jesus and fail to understand that there were a number of people behind the scenes who in many ways made it possible for Jesus and his apostles to do what they did. The danger in the church is that ministry gets reduced to a few key functions in the life of the church. We understand that not everyone can preach and do that well. We understand that it takes some skill to play an instrument, and some people are definitely not well suited to leading the singing in the congregation. We may be wise to not allow certain people to serve on the financial committee. Yes, there are some positions best left to people with skill and ability. Yet there are a whole host of activities that do not necessarily take skill in the life of the church that need to be done. We can think here of the fact that snow needs to be shoveled, grass needs to be cut, floors need to be washed, and coffee needs to be made. Now, on that last point, I've tasted enough church coffee over the years, and maybe that one should be in the skill side of things. And then there are toilets to be cleaned, so on and so forth. I believe that Jesus accomplished what he did in part because of volunteers on his ministry team who did what needed to be done, like Peter's mother-in-law. One final thought on this passage, and it is a question of how do we minister to people on our ministry team? Did Jesus send an email to Peter saying that Team Jesus would not be the same without him? Did Jesus give Peter a pair of ringside seats at the next gladiator show in Sepphoris? What Peter did was touch his mother-in-law, which would have impacted Peter's wife. This in turn would have had a positive impact on Peter's family, and this in turn would have impacted Peter. Jesus ran a ministry and not a business. He knew that if he took care of his people, his ministry would benefit. Unfortunately, some of the most uncaring people in the world are church leaders who approach their job as a business and their people as replaceable cogs in the machinery of ministry. Jesus ministered to those who are part of his ministry team and those outside of his team. May we follow his example.